Welcome to Somali Nexus, your portal into the untold stories, forgotten legacies, and powerful heritage of the Somali people. I'm your host, and today we bring you an epic exploration titled 600 Years of Power inside the Warsangali Sultanate. In the modern world, we often hear about the grand empires of the West or the towering dynasties of Asia. But hidden in the Horn of Africa lies a legacy just as rich, just as strategic, and just as impactful for over 6 centuries. From the late 13th century all the way to the early 20th, the Warsangali Sultanate wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. In this episode, we uncover the roots of this remarkable Islamic Sultanate, born from the vision of the Warsangali clan and forged through leadership, maritime trade, intellectual ambition, and spiritual grounding. We'll explore how their early mastery of the seas connected them with scholars and merchants from Arabia, India, and the Swahili coast, and how their economy, powered by frankincense, livestock, and wisdom, made them a force in both diplomacy and defense. But it wasn't all peace and prosperity. From fierce rivalries with neighboring sultanates, to resisting the tides of colonial ambition, to navigating complex alliances with powers like the Darwish movement, the Warsangali Sultanate reveals a history of strategy, resilience, and calculated power. So, whether you're a history enthusiast, a student of Somali culture, or just someone searching for real African legacies, this episode is for you. Stay with us. Somali Nexus begins now. Welcome to the deep dive. We often look at the big empires, but today we're focusing on a fascinating power in the Horn of Africa that carved out a significant history for centuries. The Warsangali Sultanate. From roughly the late 13th to the early 20th century, this Islamic Sultanate really shaped what we now know as Somalia and the Somali Peninsula. It's a story with real staying power.
It absolutely is. And what's compelling is how this history, though perhaps less widely known, offers such a rich understanding of the region.
Right.
Our aim in this deep dive is to uncover the essence of this sultanate. We'll be drawing from documented narratives and even some surprisingly detailed digital sources to provide a clear picture of their origins, societal structure, economic foundations, the challenges they grappled with, and their interactions with European powers. It's all about getting to the core of what made this sultanate thrive.
Okay, so let's go right to the start. The Warsangali Sultanate emerged around 1298. Who were the people who brought it into being, and what were the initial sparks?
Well, the genesis lies with the Warsangali clan, a major and influential part of the Darude family of Somali clans.
Okay, Darude, got it.
They have a fascinating origin story, tracing their lineage back to figures like Sheikh Ismail bin Ibrahim al-Jabarti, among other individuals with both Arab and Somali heritage who arrived in the Horn much earlier. But here's where it gets really interesting. They transitioned from a lifestyle centered around nomadic pastoralism and trade,
right,
the traditional way, to a more defined political structure under the Garad dynasty, starting with Garad Dhidhin. It wasn't a sudden shift, but a gradual organization of their existing societal structures.
That makes sense. So it wasn't just a group of people deciding one day to form a sultanate. There was a lineage and a process. You mentioned their early seafaring. How crucial was that for their development?
Oh, it was foundational. Their early command of the sea and their connections across the Islamic world, particularly with the Arabian Peninsula, weren't just advantageous. They were integral to their growth. They weren't isolated on the Horn.
No, definitely not.
They proactively built strong diplomatic and trade links with Arab traders and religious scholars. If you think about it, this not only provided the initial fuel for their economic engine, but also created an environment where Islamic learning could flourish within the Sultanate from its early days. What does this early embrace of maritime activity tell us about the strategic thinking of the founders?
It's a great point. It shows a real outward orientation from the beginning. So with that economic and intellectual foundation, what did their actual political and social structure look like? How was power distributed and maintained?
Okay, so at the apex was the hereditary monarchy.
Yeah.
With sultans often referred to as Garad, holding significant power.
Garad, okay. Mm-hmm.
However, it wasn't a system of absolute, unchecked authority. The sultan governed with the council of a significant body of elders respected religious leaders, and key military commanders.
So a council.
Yeah. This suggests a more consultative form of governance, perhaps reflecting existing clan traditions adapted to a larger political entity. It raises the question of how these different power centers balanced each other.
Interesting. So while the Sultan was central, there were other influential groups involved. And you highlighted the early connection to Islam. How deeply did Islamic principles permeate their society and governance?
Islam was absolutely central. Sharia law was the basis of their legal system, administered through Islamic courts and overseen by qadis or judges.
Right, the qadis, which...
What's fascinating here is the pervasive influence of religious leaders. They weren't just confined to religious matters. They played a notable role in shaping social norms and even influencing political decisions.
So they had real clout.
Definitely. Furthermore, the sultans themselves actively championed Islamic scholarship and education, acting as patrons of learning, which further solidified the faith's importance and likely contributed to their legitimacy.
It sounds like a really interesting blend of centralized authority with the influence of both clan traditions and religious law.
Precisely. While the sultan provided that overarching leadership, the governance had a significant degree of decentralization. Local clan elders continued to wield authority within their own territories. This was a smart way to maintain stability, as it built upon the existing framework of the traditional Somali clan structure rather than trying to supplant it entirely.
Right, work with the existing system.
Exactly. It makes you wonder how they managed to balance these local autonomies with the need for unified action under the Sultan.
Okay, so we have a picture of their origins and how they were organized. Now let's talk about what fueled their growth and allowed them to maintain their influence. Their economy.
Right. Trade was undeniably the lifeblood of the Warsangali Sultanate. Their strategic location along the Gulf of Aden was like hitting the jackpot for maritime commerce.
Location, location, location.
Totally. But they didn't just sit there. They actively exploited this advantage, developing extensive trade networks that stretched across the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, India, and down the Swahili coast.
Wow.
This wasn't just local bartering. It was participation in a major global trade system of the time.
That's a massive reach. What were the key commodities that they were trading? What did they have that others wanted? And what did they need to bring in?
Okay, so their primary exports were valuable natural resources and livestock. Think of highly prized frankincense and myrrh.
Ah, the classic ones.
Yeah, which were in demand for religious ceremonies and medicinal purposes across vast distances, as well as animal hides and gum arabic. In return, they imported manufactured goods and luxury items that would have enhanced their status and quality of life. Textiles, ceramics, those highly sought-after spices from the East, and crucially, weaponry, which would have been essential for both defense and projecting their power.
It really paints a picture of them as shrewd players in a much larger economic world.
Absolutely. The Warsangali merchants were renowned for their skill in navigating those complex trade routes. Their ports weren't just transactional hubs. They evolved into vibrant cultural and intellectual centers, drawing traders and scholars from many different regions.
So cosmopolitan hubs.
Exactly, which undoubtedly added to the richness of the Sultanate itself. But beyond this thriving maritime trade, we shouldn't overlook the importance of their land-based activities, primarily agriculture and pastoralism.
Right, because a stable local economy would also be key. You can't just rely on imports.
Exactly. They maintained significant herds of camels, cattle, goats, and sheep, which provided essential sustenance for the local population and were also important export commodities.
That makes sense.
And while the climate was generally arid, they did cultivate crops like sorghum, millet, and dates in the more fertile inland valleys and coastal oases.
Okay, so some farming too.
Yes, and their expertise in water conservation techniques using wells and managing seasonal river flows was absolutely critical for sustaining both their livestock and their limited agricultural output. It highlights their ingenuity in adapting to their environment.
Okay, so a really diverse economic base with international trade as a major driver. Now, a powerful entity like this inevitably encounters challenges. Tell us about their military strength and the kinds of conflicts they found themselves in.
Yeah, so the Warsangali Sultanate maintained a well-organized and capable military. They had cavalry and infantry forces, and significantly a navy that patrolled the crucial Gulf of Aden.
A navy, too. Interesting.
This naval strength was vital for safeguarding their trade interests and projecting their influence in the region. They were involved in several notable rivalries and conflicts. A significant one was with the Adjuran Sultanate to the south.
Ah, the Adjuran. Heard of them.
Right, with both competing for control over key trade routes and broader regional dominance, these were often complex power struggles with shifting alliances.
So it wasn't just peaceful trade. There were definite power dynamics at play with their neighbors. What about external threats from further afield?
They certainly faced those. Throughout history, Ethiopian emperors had ambitions to expand their control into Somali territories, and the Warsangali were part of that larger historical pattern of resistance.
Highland, lowland, dynamic.
Exactly. What's particularly interesting is that they also found themselves caught in the middle of the major global power struggles for control of Indian Ocean trade routes involving empires like the Ottomans and the Portuguese.
Wow, the big leagues.
Yeah. And remarkably, the Warsangali, through a combination of their own military strength and strategic alliances, were actually successful in repelling these powerful external forces for a considerable period.
Really? How did a relatively regional power manage to hold off such significant empires? That's impressive.
It really is. It speaks to their strategic capabilities, their naval strength, maybe knowing the local waters better.
Right, home advantage. But as we move into the 19th century, the rise of European colonial powers must have presented a new level of threat.
Absolutely. The 19th century saw the increasing colonial ambitions of Britain and Italy become a major factor in the region. The Warsangali Sultanates, like many others, mounted a fierce resistance.
There must have been key figures leading that resistance.
Yes, Sultan Muhammad Ali Shire emerges as a central figure in the early 20th century for his resolute opposition to British rule. Despite his determined efforts, the Sultanate was eventually brought under control and formally incorporated into British Somaliland in 1887 through a series of treaties.
1887. So that's the formal endpoint, more or less.
Well, the formal incorporation date, yes, but it's important to understand that these treaties were often signed under significant duress, reflecting the overwhelming power of the colonial forces. The resistance didn't just stop overnight.
Under duress is a key phrase that really highlights the imbalance of power.
Precisely. And it's worth noting that I.M. Lewis, a highly respected scholar of Somali history, considered the Warsangali to be the most powerful of the Somali sultanates within the British protectorate, even as they faced these immense colonial pressures.
So even among the groups under British control, they stood out.
They did. The 1886 treaty with Britain reveals a lot about the nature of these interactions. In exchange for British protection, quote unquote protection, the Warsangali agreed to limit their foreign relations, assist British shipping, suppress the slave trade, and accept the presence of British agents.
Basically giving up chunks of sovereignty.
Exactly. It essentially marked a significant erosion of their sovereignty.
So even their strength couldn't ultimately withstand the might of the colonial powers. What about their connections to other resistance movements in the region, like the Darwish movement led by Syed Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, the Mad Mullah, as the British called him?
That's a critical point of intersection. Robert L. Hess's analysis of the Darwish movement highlights Syed Mohammed Abdullah Hassan's efforts to build alliances with various Somali groups, including the Warsangali.
Right, trying to unite resistance as a way
to resist the encroaching colonial powers and navigate the complex web of regional rivalries. There was indeed a degree of collaboration. However, it wasn't always a straightforward alliance.
Complicated.
Very. For instance, in May 1916, the Darwish even launched an attack on Las Korey, which was sometimes the Warsangali capital, but they were repelled by a British warship.
So Darwish is attacking the Warsangali?
Yes. And then, interestingly, just a few months later, in September of the same year, it was Sultan Mohamoud Ali Shire himself who requested British troops to occupy Las Korey, fearing another dervish invasion.
Wow. Okay, so Alliances were shifting constantly based on immediate threats.
It really underscores the fluid and sometimes precarious political landscape of the time, choosing between different perceived threats. It paints
A picture of a very complex and dynamic period with shifting loyalties and strategic considerations. Let's bring it back to the key individuals who really shaped the Warsangali Sultanate story. We've mentioned a couple already.
Yes, Garad Dhidhin holds that fundamental role as the first ruler and the founder of the dynasty. Around 1298, he laid the initial groundwork for the Sultanate's development. The founder, then Sultan Mohamoud Ali Shire, stands out as the leader who navigated the intense period of colonial expansion, putting up significant resistance before ultimately facing exile.
Absolutely a tragic figure in some ways, leading during that difficult transition.
You could say that it's also important to acknowledge the broader lineage of sultans. There were periods of internal instability, such as after the death of Garad.
Succession issues, perhaps.
Possibly. But figures like Garad Ali Dable, who famously returned from exile in Yemen and reportedly used cannon fire in battle to reassert authority, played crucial roles in maintaining the continuity of the Sultanate.
Cannon fire, a dramatic return. Indeed.
Very dramatic. These individuals shaped the course of Warsangali history through their leadership and actions, both successes and periods of difficulty.
So we're looking at a period of rule that spans many centuries. What is the lasting significance of the Warsangali Sultanate? What's its legacy today?
Well, its sheer longevity from the late 13th century to the late 19th or early 20th century is in itself a remarkable achievement.
Over 600 years, basically.
Right. But beyond that, its legacy of determined resistance against colonial rule is a significant source of pride and historical memory.
Yeah, that resistance narrative is powerful.
Its contributions to Islamic scholarship and its role in fostering a sense of shared identity and unity among Somalis in the region are also enduring. Even in contemporary Somali politics and society, the Warsangali people continue to play an important role carrying forward that historical identity and heritage.
So it's not just a chapter in a history book, it's a living part of Somali identity.
Absolutely. Understanding the history of the Warsangali Sultanate provides crucial insights into the long history of resilience, strategic thinking, and cultural richness of the Somali people. It demonstrates their long-standing engagement with both regional and global powers and their persistent efforts to maintain their autonomy and way of life.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive into the Warsangali Sultanate. We've explored its origins, its political and economic structures, the challenges it faced, the key figures who led it, and its enduring legacy. It's clear that this was a significant power that played a vital role in shaping the history of the Horn of Africa.
Indeed, it really highlights the complexity and sophistication of pre-colonial African political entities and their intricate interactions with the wider world, something that is often overlooked in broader historical narratives.
Absolutely. And on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to consider. Given the Warsangali Sultanate's long and multifaceted history of navigating intricate relationships with both neighboring powers and distant empires, what potential insights might its experiences offer for understanding the complex geopolitical dynamics we observe in the Horn of Africa today?
That's a good question.
Think about the enduring interplay of trade, diplomacy, and resistance, and how those forces continue to shape long-term outcomes in this strategically vital region.
And that's what Somali Nexus is here for, connecting the past to the present, one story at a time. So if today's episode sparks something in you, share it, talk about it. Let's keep these conversations alive.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and follow Somali Nexus on your favorite podcast platform. We've got more stories coming, from ancient trade routes to modern movements.